In fact, he's currently managing some of the tallest multi-storey residential developments in the UK. So an ideal man to talk to us today. Ian's a certificated surveyor in structural waterproofing and has a keen interest in waterproofing envelope design, which extends to basement waterproofing design. So who knows, we might be able to tempt him back and to wax lyrical on those subjects as well for another day. As I say, we've got a big audience today. It's fantastic to see, but if you could stay on mute, any burning questions, if you could use the sort of chat button to log them, and then at the end of the presentation, I'll sift what I can out of those, time available, and put them to Ian at the end. So without further ado, I'll stop wittering on and hand over to Ian. So take it away, Ian.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Good morning, everyone. As I said, my name's Ian Burwood, and I'll start the presentation now regarding the BSR, or the Building Regulatory Reform, and what's happened, what's happening now, and what's likely to happen in the future. Can everybody see my screen? Is that all okay? I can see that, Ian. So I think everybody else is on mute. So, but that looks good to me. All right, great. Okay, right. So obviously we had the Grenfell disaster. And as a kind of fallout from that, the DCLG Building Safety Programme was set up, which included the public inquiry for Sir Martin Moore-Bick, the Industry Response Group, the IRG, Building Reg Review from Dame Judith Hackett, which is the main kind of focus of this presentation, and an expert panel led by Sir Ken Wright. And the aim was to ensure residents of high-rise buildings are safe and feel safe from the risk of fire now and in the future. And the feel safe is really, really important, because whilst you may have, just sort of playing devil's advocate a bit, a fire tested facade that does have a phenolic insulation in it and it complies, the residents might not feel safe because of media pressure or because of other kind of factors. So the idea is that they actually feel safe as well. So as a bit of a timeline, June 2017, obviously the Grenfell incident occurred. Then in July 17, the MHCLG commissioned a large ACM screening test programme, which looked at all the different ACMs, the 3 different types, and tested them with the different substrate, the different external insulations within the cavities. So you've got the something like Duo Slab, the mineral bat, and you've got the phenolic insulation like K15. And it's really to try and understand the fire performance of those, because for various different reasons there was no testing data for those. It was kind of a bit of I'm not entirely sure why there wasn't, but there wasn't. And then again in the same month, the independent review of the building regulations was commissioned by Dame Judith Hackett. Then in September 17, the industry responded to a call for evidence, and then in December of the same year, Dame Judith Hackett, the interim report, was published. And then in May 2018, 7 working groups were created, and the Dame Judith Hackett final report was issued. July that year, the HCLGC review of the 9th report issued recommendation, and a draft revision of the approved document B1 and B2 was issued for consultation. And then as we start to get further into it, it gets a bit more meaty. So in September 2018, the MHCLG circular assessments of external wall cladding system and advice note 18 was to remove all ACM from existing buildings. So that was where that blanket ban came from, or that was when it came in. There's a little star there you'll see, but category 3 ACM or category 2 ACM when used in a system with rigid polymeric based foam insulation. So it wasn't necessarily every single bit of ACM. It depended on the PE core ACM had to come off because that was the most at risk, but depending on the insulation or the total wall build up, the other 2 could be allowed essentially. But I think industry was just like, let's just get rid of all of it, really, just to be sure. In October 2018, the government issued a statement on combustible materials. In December 2018, amendments to the regulations were made, effective immediately, with transitional period for buildings that have been submitted full plans prior to December. So it's quite a hard line. They dropped it in. The transitional period started only for a couple of months. We saw the amendments to ADB B2 The Danger of Hackett implementation plan was issued, which confirmed 100% Hackett. Basically, everything needed to be instigated. Housing health and safety rating system was amended to consider cladding, which were previously it didn't. And there was a call for evidence on a technical review of ADB. So basically, that was when we had zero combustibility, or A1 or A2, for relevant buildings over 18 metres. And in February last year, the transitional period for the buildings submitted for full plans expired. So everyone was now full kind of non-combustible, as it were. And in March, there was a further minor amendment to ADB. And in May last year, consultation on BS 84141 and BS 84142 was produced. And 84141 is a test for, which is what BR 135 is based off of. And it's the fire test of insulent materials over 18 metres. The one represents the backing wall, so one is masonry block, and two is framed is a framed substrate, so SFS with sheathing board, which is more commonly found on buildings over 18 metres. So the MHCLG issued their response to that and clarifications to any FAQs which came out of that, and then a government fund of £200 million was announced to remediate existing effective facades in the private sector with ACM, just ACM. That was soon realised that that wasn't enough, and it got bumped up to 600 million. And as we'll come on to in a bit later, they then announced a £1.2 billion fund to try and remediate all facades, not necessarily ones just with ACM on it. In June 2019, the government issued consultation on proposals for reform of the building safety regulation system, which was an eight-week consultation. And that was to go before a parliament in 20/21. So we're kind of getting towards that process now, with obviously the draft bill just being issued last month. In June last year, the MHCLG issued a advice note on balconies in all residential buildings, and it stated that combustibility limits are applicable to balconies above and below 18 metres. Now we saw a bit of, I wouldn't call it backtracking or anything like that, but the government really started to try and sort of found themselves being backed into a corner, I think, by industry, and so they started issuing these advice notes that kind of reminded industry of their duties and the existing regulations that have always been in place. In June 2019 as well, the government commissioned a study on the ban impact. So we had this ban, the regulation changed, there was the exempt list, you know, things like cavity trays and all that sort of thing, which caused a lot of issues in industry. They commissioned an annual review of that, and they invited 100 companies or stakeholders, or what we're going to call them, within the industry, to comment in July, and I'll come on to that a bit later on. In July 2019, ADB got revised, moving flats from Volume 2 to Volume 1, and it included the Reg 7 changes that we saw in December 18. And in the same month last year, the MHCLG issued a circular letter about the B4 requirement, reminding the industry that B4 has always been relevant to buildings above and below 18 metres. So it's kind of not their get out clause as such, but it was a gentle nudge to say, you know, obviously you've been applying this regulation above and below 18 metres, haven't you? And I think the industry kind of got a bit confused by that. And then in September this year, the consultation on 11-metre building changes was issued, ended in November 2020. In January, the review of the ban on the use of combustible material in and on the external walls of buildings, including the survey findings, was issued. And the survey found in general it was a positive move. However, there's still confusion. Again, cavity trays, you know, what are seals, what aren't seals, membranes, etc. The industry invited to comment on suggestions with deadline extended to 25th of May 2020. Now, I haven't heard anything. I don't think we have anything yet as to the outcome of that. So obviously that would be quite key, as we'll come on to a bit later on. And in the same month, the MHCLG announced the building safety regulator to be in a shadow form of the HSE. Okay, which was the big kind of thing, the big shake up, or the way things are going to sort of go from once it's passed by the Queen. In March 2020, £1 billion was set aside in the budget for facade remediation of non-ACM buildings over 18 metres. And in April this year, they announced a series of measures to improve safety in new and existing buildings. You had the building safety regulator, the National Construction Products Regulator, published test results of further non-ACM products like high pressure laminates and timber claddings, just to really get a really good broad picture of the exact issue that we have, and updates to approved document B, plus recognising the issue with the dreaded EWS1 certificates with regards to obtaining PI for that and so forth. And then in May, approved document B update was published, confirming sprinklers and consistent wayfinding signage to all buildings over 11 metres now. So there's a kind of reduction there, 4 stories, but the relevant building requirement is still 18 metres. And the draft safety bill published, plus a correction slip. So that was kind of the big E that we'd all been waiting for last month. And I said earlier, August, we're still waiting for an update from the HCLG regarding the proposed changes, ban and the review of that by industry. So that'd be quite important, because that will save a lot of issues, again, with regards to cavity trays, etc. Hopefully. So if we go way back, obviously, before the changes, we had a whole raft of different ways for compliance with buildings over 18 metres or relevant buildings. You had approved document B1 and B2. Obviously B2 at that time, or B1 volume 2 was the most relevant one. You had BR135, which is the fire performance of external thermal insulation in walls, multi-storey buildings. You had BS9999, you had BS9991, and you had BCA Technical Note 18. Now BCA Technical Note 18 kind of trying to pull all this guidance together and give the building control bodies a kind of linear approach as to how we can approve or review these types of facades. So the changes to the regulations and ADBB2. The first thing to note really is changes to regulations of law. There is no latitude, it's the law, and they will always take the conservative position. Okay, changes to the approved documents. These are guidance supporting the regulations, but ignore these at your peril, particularly when it comes to things like fire safety. However, they're not legal requirements. Okay, so designs that are divergent from ADB2 should be substantiated by a fire engineer and accepted by the building control body before it goes any further. But it's not ideal. I think in the current climate, you really need to be sticking to that guidance, otherwise you're on kind of thin ice, as it were. So regulation 7.4, in this regulation, a relevant building means a building with a storey not including rooftop plant areas or any storey consisting exclusively of plant rooms at least 18 metres above ground level, on which contains one or more dwelling, contains an institution, or contains a room for residential purposes, excluding any room in a hostel, hotel or boarding house. Okay, again, we'll come on to that a bit later on. And the first time we saw a real definite definition of above ground level, and it was in a regulation as well, it wasn't in an approved document, so it's law. Above ground level in relation to a storey means above ground level when measured from the lowest ground level adjoining the outside of a building to the top of the floor surface of the storey. So it's not the median ground level, it's not the pump access level. You've got to pick the lowest ground level on that building, and that's where you take it from. So it's nice and clear. And then regulation 2.6, in these regulations, any reference to external wall of a building includes a reference to anything located within a space forming part of the wall, any decoration or other finish applied to any external wall, but not internal surface forming part of the wall, any windows and doors in the wall, and any part of a roof pitched at an angle more than 70 degrees to the horizontal. So basically that's where a roof turns into a wall, that that kind of magic 70 degrees. So again, first time it's in a definition in regulation, so it's law, of external walls. And then there's also guidance on specified attachments in regulation 2.6, which define those as being a balcony attached to an external wall, a device for reducing heat gain within a building by deflecting sunlight which is attached to an external wall, or a solar panel attached to an external wall. Now, again, clear guidance on balconies that hadn't been defined really before, or specifically in the approved documents. Never really come across a solar panel within an external wall yet, but I know they have been done. And then obviously you've got your brise soleil, the reduced heat gain on a building. Now that then got retracted because I believe a brise soleil manufacturer or possibly an architect took them to court over it, because the consultation period for that particular regulation change wasn't done according to the process. So it was a bit of a technical knockout, that one. So that one got taken out, but it's going to come back in again. So the basic principle of these regulation changes were that all elements of an external wall, excluding internal decorative finishes, are to be to BSEN 13501 European Combustibility Class A1 or A2 S1D0. So S is the smoke that's emitted and D are the droplets that are formed. Or unless they're included in the list of exempt materials, which we'll come on to in a bit later on. So when looking at the approved document and the guidance that's around, obviously they had this circular from the MHCLG about external fire spread and B41, which states the external walls of the building shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to height, use and position of the building. So it doesn't actually tell you the height that you need to consider or the position or anything like that, but it kind of gives you this blanket overarching requirement there. And this is what the government are kind of hanging their hat on a little bit, or previously did. So there's no change. It's still a requirement. It still exists. And as you can see from the diagram to the right, it's to prevent this kind of scenario where you've got an external fire or an internal fire. You get breakout through the window. Yeah, it then has a possibility to ignite the facade. And if the facade doesn't adequately resist fire spread, you know, it's got combustible materials in it, or it could be the surface spread of flame, the finishes. It can lead to secondary fires, and it can have, you know, this consequential rapid fire spread up the building. Now, in approved document B, volume 1, B1, dwelling houses 2013, and we had volume 2, B2, buildings other than dwellings, but that included high-rise residential. They revised that in July 2019 to reflect the Reg 7 changes, and in May they revised it to reflect the 11 metre change. And then what we saw was that in July they took out high-rise residential from volume 2 and they put it into volume 1, which makes more sense because it's residential and domestic. BR 135, that guidance, the fire performance of external thermal insulation for walls of multi-storey buildings, that has not been amended or redacted. Okay, it's still there, but due to the regulation changes, has effectively made this obsolete for relevant buildings, i.e. BS 8414 testing is no longer acceptable route of compliance. It's got to be non-combustible or not. The Building Control Alliance, the technical guidance note 18, that was updated in September 2018 to include reference to the government circular. It's not been updated since, as far as I'm aware, the regulation changes, but is now again effectively obsolete. I'll come on to that in a second. BS 9999, there's been no update since the regulation changes, but that will obviously need to be updated as well. And again, BS 9991, same again, no update yet, but that will be coming. So going back to the BCA technical guidance note 18, this kind of gives an explanation as to why we ended up in the situation we did, where we had, you know, why the ACM build-ups hadn't been tested and that sort of thing. It gave 4 options as to how you could comply or check a facade over 18 metres. You had option 1, which was basically complied with the approved document. It was totally non-combustible or limited combustibility or better. Option 2, you had a full-scale test in accordance with BS 84141 part 1 or part 2, and install on site exactly the same construction, exactly the same breather membrane, exactly the same fixings, you know, which is very, very rare to find. And what he found was the actual test that had been commissioned had been done by manufacturers. It wasn't like an independent test. It was Kingspan or something like that. And obviously Kingspan used their breather membrane. They used their subframe for the rain screen cladding, etc. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, that one. And then option 3, you provide a fire engineered desktop study for each different wall type based on the BR 135 approach and test data. And this is where option 3 was mostly used, really, and we found all these desktop studies that were being produced where it kind of compared various different proposed facades against a current satisfactory fire test. Now, with regards to ACM and aluminium, there was no test because I think it was a bit of a known secret as such that the performance is questionable, and the desktop study report that was mostly being hung on was one for a terracotta tile. Now, you can't really compare a terracotta tile to a aluminium rain screen facade, so it kind of got a bit disjointed, or not necessarily abused, but a bit wayward. And there was option 4: provide a holistic fire engineering assessment that considers all elements of the building, including use, fire safety measures, potential risks, etc. All gone now. Okay, so that's just a bit of a background as to how we ended up with a scenario with the ACM, and basically option 1 is only available. So this guidance really has been made obsolete. So, as I referred to earlier, the combustible ban came into place, and where they said, obviously you have to be totally non-combustible, other than the exempt list. Here is the exempt list, and we all reviewed it, and we thought, okay, fair enough, we can see how we can do some of that, but there's some questionable bits in it. So after a year, the CLG engaged with experts to get a better understanding of the views and the impact that this ban had. And in June 2019, a study was commissioned. 100 relevant organisations were invited to respond, to which 34 responded. So 34% of industry responded, which you'd have thought there'd be more will respond, but not to worry. Majority reported difficulties. However, 65% thought the ban was a benefit, with 18 thinking it was detrimental. It's agreed that in general there is support for the ban. However, the scope of the ban and exempt lists need reviewing. So then this report then kind of continued on to the various sections. So I've numbered them as per the report. You can get it off the government website. So 4.1, the scope of the buildings is to be extended to hotels, hostels and boarding houses. So if you go back to that regulation I spoke about where it said doesn't include, that could potentially be changed to it does include. This hasn't come in yet, okay, and the consultation period ended on the 25th of May this year. We've not actually heard anything since, so hopefully there'll be some guidance on this as to what's going to come in and what's not. And then section 4.2, changing height of relevant buildings from 18 metres to 11 metres. Obviously that has come in now due to recent fires such as the Cube in Bolton. Now the impact of doing this, they reckon there's about a £64.5 million impact, rising to 1.2 billion if the threshold is removed entirely. So there's there was obviously they took that into consideration and considered the 64.5 million as being something that is worth, obviously not money over safety, but it's something that was is doable. And section 5, ACMP core materials to have a complete ban on any building of any height as the material possesses significant risk regardless of scenario. So whereas essentially you could have a 3-storey building, you could still use ACM under the current regulations, but they're looking for just a complete ban on ACMP core just because the calorific value is far too high. It's just too much of a risk, which is very it's sensible. And then section 6, solar shading including attachments should be retractable, or attachments, but should retractable awnings be included as currently they are. So the retractable awnings are those that are over your Costa Coffee or something like that, where you've got your typical commercial space on the ground floor. There's a question over that, and basically none exist, or I think you probably could get them, but they're very, very expensive. So they're asking industry, do you think we should retract that? Section 7, with a general review of the exempt list, requesting suggestions from industry for anything that they think should be removed or needs to be looked at, but they focused on a couple of items specifically. So 7.1, they proposed an 18-month relaxation on cavity trays, or the exemption of cavity trays between 2 leaves of masonry. So if it's between 2 leaves of masonry, you can have a cavity tray of whatever material you like. It can be it's a combustible as you like, so your DPC tray, etc. But if you have an SFS or a different backing wall, then it has to be A1 or A2 compliant. At the time, there was no product that was A1 or A2 compliant, so it was a bit tricky. So they thought, it took a while for industry to try and catch up, or stuff to come to the market. Products are coming onto the market slowly, but there's still a lot of question over them. So the industry was really struggling to satisfy that. So they're looking at relaxing that for about an 18-month period, allowing industry to catch up. And then by the time that 18-month period ends, we should hopefully have some products, a range of products that are suitable and can be used. If you have any further questions, I know these are quite the main topic, particularly the designers, just post them in the message conversation on the side, and Trevor then will read some of the questions out at the end, and hopefully we can answer them for you. So LABC warranty in conjunction with LABC building control, depending on who we're working with and what area it is. We currently have 2 non-combustible cavity tray systems that we accept in principle. It's not yeah, that's fine, go ahead and use it. If they come to us and say we want to use ACS or we want to use the IG, I think it's Key Fix or something like that, cavity tray product, we can say yeah, we can start off with that, but we need to see the specific, the specific job design details, and we etc., and then review it on a job by job basis. But like I said, I do other presentations, and you can find out more information about that if you go to the LABC warranty website. 7.2, confirmation of further research into the risk of laminated glass to balconies. Glass is currently exempt, but only in window frames. So you saw a lot of balconies with these glass balustrades. In order to achieve the containment requirements of approved document K, a lot of them were laminated. Now, the lamination, which is sandwiched between the 2 panes of glass, is highly combustible. But does it pose a risk? Don't know. But the regulations said nothing on the balconies, so that caused a bit of an upset. But most designs went back to your traditional steel balustrades. But anyway, so further research is going to be put into that to see whether that is actually a risk, with a view to possibly relaxing that or taking it off the exempt list, or adding it to the exempt list, sorry. There's additional clarification where roof membranes lap up external walls, and the Class B classification. On the exempt list, it's stated that membranes are exempt from Regulation 7 changes. However, there's also a requirement for any membrane with an external wall to be Class B. So there's a bit of a conflict there between 2 bits of guidance, or a regulation and the guidance. And obviously, where you have a roof membrane, it could be not so on a parapet, because that Regulation 7 doesn't apply to a parapet, because you've got 2 external areas either side of the wall. But if you had like a roof terrace that butts a facade, and you have to lap the waterproofing membrane up the facade, essentially that is now a membrane on the relevant wall. So hopefully they can, whether it's a risk or not, it still is very questionable, but again, hopefully they're going to be looking into that and providing further clarification on that. And then this 7.4 may lead into that one, where materials below ground level are currently exempt because they're sandwiched below ground when they're part of the facade, but they're looking to extend this to 150 mm above ground level. Okay, again, in particular around roof and facade junctions, balcony upstands, etc. There's a lot of issues with insulation at those points, because it seems a little bit silly, but where you've got an inverted roof and your XPS insulation comes into your facade, essentially that thin strip of insulation is part of the facade. So by relaxing that 250 mm zone, it kind of gets over that hurdle, and is it actually a risk? They're going to look into that a bit more, which will be good. Section 8.1, A1 and A2 classifications apply to materials tested vertically. Now this really comes into play with approved, specified attachments like balconies, etc. Whereas some flooring materials are tested horizontally to classifications A2 FL S1 and A1 FL. Okay, and now currently the regulations do not state that those classifications are acceptable, but it's not to say they aren't acceptable, but it just doesn't state it or didn't consider them. So there is a plan to include those classifications into Reg 6.3 and Reg 7.2. So that means you might have a product that has that classification, okay, that you want to use for your soffit on your balcony, on your bolt-on balcony underneath, but you can't use it because it hasn't got the designated classification as per the current regulations. So they're looking to incorporate that, which I think is a clever move, or a sensible move. And then section 8.2, there's an update of BSEN 135011, which was issued in January 2019, and that's where it needs to be included in the amended regulation 6.3 and 7.2. This has no impact really, because the classifications are still the same, but they added another classification, which is F. So on to the draft building safety bill. Okay, this was submitted or was published in July, so last month, and it's the first time we really get an indication of where things are heading and what the act looks like, and kind of lays out the different areas, the duty holders, all the different classifications, the gateways, etc. It's still not in yet. It's got to be approved, but anyway, it gives us an indication of where we're going and what to expect. So, in principle, combined with the fire safety bill and the fire safety order, which again are being revised and going to be issued towards the end of this year, the safety of residents in all blocks of multiple occupation will be improved. That is the main aim. And there's a quote here that says it will make sure that those responsible for the safety of residents are accountable for any mistakes and put them right, and take strong actions against those who break them, i.e. the new rules. Now, strong actions, if you dig into the guidance that's out there, if you fail to comply and you are a duty holder or an accountable person, you could be prosecuted with up to 10 years in jail. So it's quite serious, the ramifications of that. And so it should be, but it's the first time we've seen any kind of real kind of accountability with regards to the building regulations in this area. So the Building Safety Regulator, or the BSR, the BSR will sit within the Health and Safety Executive, and it have three main functions: to oversee the safety and standards of all buildings, directly assure the safety of high-risk buildings, and improve the competence of people responsible for managing and overseeing building work. It will establish a register of relevant buildings all across the country, existing and new. Okay, so that'll be an ongoing thing, and we'll be responsible for all major regulatory decisions at key points known as gateways throughout the life of a building, from design, planning to occupation and an ongoing occupation. This would include whether to allow the building to be constructed or later occupied, so they could have total control. They have the final say. So you could build a building, it's great, but it's got to be signed off by them, and until it's signed off by them, it cannot be occupied. So you can see where there's a lot of delays are going to come into, well, I say delays, but as in there's going to be a whole new process that the industry's got to get its head around to understand that, we find as warranty providers, without our warranty, they can't sell the unit. The unit, particularly if it's in London, could be worth, upwards of £10 million. So there's a lot of money riding on the certificate, but if there's a whole nother layer now that needs to be complied with, and if the BSR aren't happy, then it's not going to go ahead. So there has to be a real kind of the building needs to be complete. No certificates can be issued ahead of that until the BSR are happy. It will also ensure the accountable person has demonstrated appropriate mitigation of fire and structural risks during occupation. So they sign it off, gets occupied, there's an ongoing accountability for the safe occupation and management of the building. They'll also produce advice for duty holders to help complete their responsibilities. We'll come on to duty holders in a minute. Give advice on current and emerging safety risks. So really, as well as just being a regulator, they're kind of there as a resource as well for industry to go to. So it's not a case of they're just saying you've got to do this and walking away from it. It seems like they're having quite a proactive approach in being available for advice and that sort of thing, and to try and help get the buildings over the line, as it were. They'll ensure designers and builders can access advice on delivering safe buildings, like I just said, and advise government on changes to regulations and approved documents. So they kind of really become the authority or the main kind of place for regulation change or monitoring. So rather than God forbid, waiting for another disaster, it's a bit more of a proactive approach. They'll oversee the performance of building control bodies and competence of those working on buildings to give confidence to duty holders and residents. Again, you'll see when we come on to that in a bit. Will give the government new powers to better regulate construction materials and products under a new UK regulatory regime, which is what we kind of need. So currently, us as warranty providers, we'll have a facade proposed to us, particularly under the new regulations, and we'll review it. And we'll have to look at the various different testing data that's available and all that, and it's a bit disjointed, and it's still open to interpretation. You get a BBA certificate with the greatest respects of BBA. It's not the be all and end all. It's an independent review. However, it's an independent review of what the manufacturers ask them to review, or pay them for. So it's questionable. So you have to be very, very careful with BBA certificates when reviewing them with regards to fire performance. Building inspectors responsible for signing off buildings as being safe for occupation will also need to follow the new rules plus register with the BSR. Okay, so that's something that cropped up that we weren't expecting. Yeah, so then 3 main gateways that have come out of this now, or there's a bit more clarity on. You've got Gateway 1, which is at planning stage. It's the least onerous of the gateway, which ensures consultation with local fire authority, basically, and requires a fire statement covering vehicle access and access to water, amongst other things. There'll be further clarification on that, but that's at planning stage. Okay, and Gateway 2 is pre-construction stage. So planning is obtained, building regulation approval is obtained, can't start yet till you complete Gateway 2. So that requires full BSR approval for any work can start on site, and includes the start of the golden thread of material. So you know, the key information that needs to be passed on or handed down, as it were, or handed up to the various duty holders that start taking over the building, you know, through its life cycle, you know, during pre-construction, during construction, after starts. There is the potential for phased approach leading to multiple Gateway 2 approvals depending on the complexity of the building, but obviously that will be designated by the BSR as required. And then you have Gateway 3, which is the pre-occupation stage. Requires full BSR approval again for any occupation can take place. Confirms ongoing accountability, including sign-off from principal designer and contractor of full building regulation compliance. Quite how you do that, I'm not entirely sure, you know, because whether you can take the building control completion certificate as recognition of full compliance, I'm not entirely sure yet. We'll wait and see. But the principal designers, the architects or the contractors have got to say, yes, it fully complies with building regulations. You know, so there's a lot of additional QA, etc., which is going to probably come to light, or to make sure that, you know, that is actually the case. The PI for those designers and contractors no doubt will go up, you know, because everyone's having to kind of, you know, put their sort of money where their mouth is, but everyone's having to be accountable. You know, rightly so, but it's a tricky one. And then, provided the BSR is satisfied, they'll issue a building assurance certificate at this stage, which lasts 5 years, which will then allow occupation to take place. So if we get obviously various different new roles are being sort of dropped in or announced in this fire safety bill. So here's a bit of a summary of each one and what it kind of entails. So you have the duty holders. Duty holders will be designated by the BSR during the design and build, including those identified in CDM 2015 regulations, i.e. the client, principal designer, principal contractor, other designers and other contractors. So you'll be designated the duty holders, and they'll say who is the duty holder on each job. Okay, the duty holder can then be an organisation, or it can be an individual. So it could be a whole architectural practice, or it could be an individual within that architectural practice. You don't necessarily want to be in their shoes necessarily. And they'll be responsible for Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 completion, which is pre-start and before occupation. This is to make it clear who's responsible for each stage and what is required to move to the next stage, enabling the golden thread of vital building information gathered over its lifetime. So you have the duty holders who are really responsible for the design, the construction, and then the completion of the building. That is where the duty holders kind of are responsible, and they'll then hand over to the accountable person. So the accountable person, upon completion of the building, will need to be registered. The building will need to be registered with the BSR, and the accountable person needs to apply for the building assurance certificate, or the BAC. Once occupied, the accountable person will need to conduct and maintain a safety case risk assessment from a fire and structural risk point of view, and will be more than likely an organisation, but could be an individual, and in complex buildings could have more than one accountable person. They will appoint a building safety manager to oversee the day-to-day management. This appointment can be vetoed by the BSR if deemed necessary. So if they're not happy, the BSR need to know who the accountable person is. They'll check them. they'll then need to know who the accountable person has designated as the building safety manager, and they'll check then. And if they're not happy, or it's not demonstrated that they're competent to do so, they will not approve it. So there's so many different steps here which kind of can get in the way of buildings being handed over in sort of good time, and money's being transferred, etc. The building safety manager, also the accountable person, will have to listen and respond to residents' concerns quickly and effectively, which is one really big thing which came out of the Hackett report with regards to Grenfell. And the BSR will regulate their performance throughout the lifetime of the build, so they're going to be constantly monitored to make sure they're doing what is needed to be done, and ultimately, maintaining the safety of residents. They'll be responsible for the new building safety. Responsible for the new building safety charge, making it easy for leaseholders to see and know what they're being charged for. So you hear these stories of particularly EWS1 certificates where the leaseholders are being charged for the remedial works, by the freeholders, which seems a little bit tough, but obviously they have their reasons. So now there's a new building safety charge. So before anything gets taken out, or funds to be taken out of that account need to be applied for, and the residents can see, or the leaseholders can see exactly what's coming out and exactly what it's for, so they can, it doesn't get taken advantage of. And limits have been set as well, so only a certain amount can come out of that building safety charge, so to make it, to make sure it's affordable, because replacing facades isn't cheap. We've had a couple of jobs that we were involved with where the facade did get replaced, and it was, it was a good side, or the other side of £3 million for just a 7-storey building, so it's quite expensive. So the building safety manager, they're appointed by the accountable person, can also be an organisation or an individual. Ensure conditions in the building assurance certificate issued by the BSR are complied with to the satisfaction of the accountable person and ultimately the BSR. So when the BSR issue the building assurance certificate, say, yeah, you can take occupation, they can stipulate certain conditions on that certificate. And that is going to be the key focus to make sure the building safety manager is making sure that those conditions are being complied with or being satisfied. They ensure the competence of those employed in the maintenance and management of the building is also acceptable. Again, that would also be probably a condition on the building assurance certificate. And implement a resident engagement strategy, ensuring a clear communication conduit for the residents, so they'll be the main go-to person for the residents if they have any concerns, or to maintain a constant flow of communication about between them and the residents, to make sure that everything is satisfied, or everyone is ultimately safe, or they feel safe. So the residents, who are obviously the main driver for all this, is entitled to receive key information about their building and how it's being managed at any point, allowed to participate in decision making with regards to the safety of their building, and if the building safety manager is not performing, they can go straight to the BSR and raise their concerns. Okay, but equally, as we found in the Hackett report, the residents also have a responsibility. Okay, so to cooperate with the BSM and any requirements they ask for, and if not, the BSM can enforce responsibilities upon them, and it allows them the residents, allows them the right to complain to the new Homes Ombudsman, of which developers must be a member, which holding them to account, including the ability to pay compensation when needed. So if a facade remediation is needed, then the Ombudsman can hold the developer to account. Something that me and Trevor chatted about a couple of weeks ago, there's this new permitted development relaxation. I thought it was quite relevant, where they're allowing an initial 2 stories on blocks of flats or apartments, which can, depending on the height of the existing building, have quite a big knock-on effect. And it's just whether people really understand that, or we just need to make sure that when we have this scenario, we get in there real quick. And we sort of make it known to the developer or the client exactly the implication of that. For instance, if you had a building that was previously sub 18 metres but is now 18 metres or over 18 metres, it then becomes a relevant building. Therefore, the entire facade needs to be complied with. The fire performance of that may also have an impact on things like sprinklers, dry risers, firefighting lifts, etc. All the life safety all the life safety elements within that building may not now comply because it's now pushed it into a relevant building area. And equally, if it's if it's below 11 meters and now it pushes it over 11 meters, you've got to put sprinklers in it, and that sort of thing. So it can have a real big impact on the existing building. It's not a straightforward process when it comes to the building regulations. So yeah, and also it would be subject to the BSR as well. So you'd have to go through that process. So what's next with the regulation changes? The draft bill will be examined by a parliamentary committee before it's finalised. Apologies for the spelling mistake there. So it's currently out for consultation, and then once that consultation is completed and there's the review of that, it'll be formally introduced to the House of Commons and then presented to the Queen for formal agreement, turning it into an act. It's going to go ahead, okay? So we've got to really jump on board now with it and make sure that we're all compliant and try and comply with it the best we can. Tougher regulations, possibly on toxic building materials. This was raised in the Hackett report, but hasn't been discussed. So it's not necessarily just the combustibility of the material; it's what gases it gives off. Which is definitely a relevant thing. The industry now has an educated customer. Sale value or saleability of units, residential or commercial, is being affected by the cladding materials and insulation products that have been used on the external wall, regardless of when it was built. Okay, which is where this EWS1 issue has come to light, where people are trying to sell their buildings, which may well have complied at the time they were built, but now there's no regard for that, and they're struggling to sell, or they're seeing the value of their property or their asset being dropped quite substantially. Annual fire insurance premiums are being affected due to the cladding materials, and PI has been greatly affected, particularly in building control. There was a big fallout of that, and with PI, some PIs not being renewed, or some providers leading the market. There's quite a few have left, or one great big exclusion in there that says you cannot design or comment or anything to do with the fire performance of facades. Fire engineering assessments have effectively been banned on external facades, and about over 13 fire safety working groups have been set up to help identify other issues. So there's constant, before the BSR obviously comes into place, who will be doing this constant review of regulations and trying to foresee any issues that are on the horizon. We have these working groups currently which are looking at various different things ahead of that change. Tougher policing and penalties for non-compliance, which we spoke about, up to 10 years in jail potentially. And expect a period of confusion whilst the BSR is set up. It will come in and it will be tricky to deal with, and it will be a bit disjointed, no doubt, and it will delay things, but nevertheless it's got to be complied with. And the impact of regulatory reform, or the gateways will have, on project planning, the information collected and collated is required, or it's, you could collate something and it could be insufficient, not signed by the right person. There's so much stuff to think about, and the impact that has on staff resources, training and allocation, for developers. It's expected the exempt schedule of elements is to get smaller, so even less scope, so it's not going to get extended or made bigger. Obviously, we have the ban review, which may see a few things get relaxed, but they're looking at making the exempt list smaller, so less things will be exempt under the building regulations. New products are coming out. Obviously, we've got the cavity trays which are coming out, which help resolve issues. So hopefully we'll see more and more of those products. You have the Class B rated membranes, which is good. Vapor control layers though do apply to that. So whereas you had your 500 gauge DPM previously, you now needs to be a Class B rated membrane. The A1 rating being extended to flat roof areas potentially. Not heard anything about this yet, but we are getting a lot of developers ask us about the requirement for that, and currently it's as per approved document, so it's AA, AB, AC, BB, that current rating system. However, if you can imagine, if you have a building which is steps and you have a facade, roof terrace, and then a facade, that that roof covering there could quite easily propagate fire, which can cause an issue on the facade, sort of it butts to the next level. However, having said that, the facade, if it's compliant with regulations, should be totally non-combustible anyway. However, we'll see. And then the fire testing of full systems rather than individual components, in particular balconies. I know Sapphire are doing a lot of work with the fire performance of their facades, and whether, particularly in rain screen cladding build-ups, we've got multi-layers of different, you've got the rain screen panel, you've got the subframe, you've got the insulation, you've got the membrane, you've got the shielding board, you've got so many different elements within those build-ups, and it's whether they're going to insist that you have a whole, facade test rather than just one individual component. So we'll see if that comes in. And that's it. Thank you for your time. Well, 4 minutes short. Like I said earlier, if you visit LABC warranty website, there's loads of information on there on our resource hub about lots of different subjects. It ranges from your kind of your two-story houses to your multi-story buildings, and on there you can potentially book a if you sign up to it, presentations from myself and our sales team on various different subjects. You kind of click on a menu and you can choose, like which Trevor kind of suggested earlier, about basement waterproofing, heat soak testing of glass. It's all the kind of the big blue roofs, zero fall roofs, and what our requirements are on those. So yeah, thank you very much.
Right, Ian, thank you very much. Thanks for that. It was pretty whirlwind tour through the evolving fire safety regulations, a lot to pack in. So thanks. I think you've comprehensively covered it, and it may be that a few people's heads were left a little bit spinning at times, understandably. But the point is, the fire safety bill is heralding the biggest changes to the regulatory system in this country, probably since I was a spog back in 1984 when the Building Act came in and changed the whole perspective of our service. So as that evolves, we'll be putting on additional events and supporting our customers with additional training. And I know Ian's organisation will be doing the same thing, and maybe a few more joint events to be had. There's not that many questions. I've got a question from Robert Noble. Glad to see. Nice to have you along, Robert. Any idea of a time frame for implementation?
I believe 2021 is the kind of the limit that's been put on it. Is when it needs to be in place. So at some point next year. Quite how long it takes to get through the parliamentary committee, I'm not entirely sure. Depends what feedback there is from industry as well, I guess. And then obviously how long the Queen takes to sign something, I don't know, or approve something, but we'll see. But definitely by 2021.
Excellent. And any thoughts? I haven't seen anything about the ban review summary.
Yeah.
When can we expect any clarifications or changes resulting from that? I wonder, because they're very much awaited, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean that's the current biggest issue there is in industry at the moment with those ban on those materials. So that the suggested, what we ran through earlier, the suggested changes will be welcome, but that consultation closed on the 25th of May this year, but I've not heard anything yet. So we have chased them up, because we're quite keen to know and educate our customers.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent that those bans were a political reaction, a knee-jerk reaction that weren't really based on hard science. It was a reassuring gesture, wasn't it? And hopefully hard science will now come to the fore, and we'll really be able to rationalise those requirements.
Yeah.
Comment from Simon Hayward, the Managing Director of Hertfordshire Building Control. These changes will result in increased costs throughout the whole process for all parties involved. Are there any estimates as to the overall cost increases? Also, and paradoxically to the intentions of the legislation, in a competitive regulatory environment, the greater the cost, the more incentive to avoid it. Good point. What measures are in place to remove the incentive to use regulators who are willing to compromise safety by ostensibly turning a blind eye to compliance? That's a long question.
Yeah,
but it makes a good point, doesn't it?
yeah. There is some analysis on the government website. There is an impact analysis. I think it's Ardwat were commissioned to work out the monetary impact. I'm not 100% sure whether that was ahead of the bill being issued, so I don't think it takes into consideration the bill. It was just looking at more the ban, the Regulation 7 changes and what impact that had. But yeah, no doubt, it's going to have a huge impact with finances, time. You basically have to have a whole department pretty much. If you're an accountable person, you're going to have an accountable, a department or within an organisation that literally just works on this. That whenever a certain golden thread piece of information is available, they get it and they put it in the folder. So it's not left at the end. We have some developers which I'm sure might leave it to the end, but they're going to come a cropper. It's got to be a proactive thing and a constant thing that's being monitored internally. But to say how much, who knows really. I'm sure there'll be an analysis of it, because obviously it's very important to understand resourcing and that sort of thing. But I couldn't honestly tell you an answer to that. And to your question about, what was it, the regulatory authorities that are willing to relax some items, they'll get caught out. Without a doubt, they'll get caught out. But the odd thing, well, not the odd thing, but the BSR is for fire safety and structure. So whether you have a mechanical vent that is of appropriate extraction rate, I don't know that. I doubt that you'll get included under the BSR. So it's not necessarily going to cover all bases necessarily. But I think when it comes to fire safety and structure in particular, you're going to be on very thin ice if you're going to start being a bit lenient. And plus, you get caught out because everything's going to get reviewed and everyone's going to have to sign it off. Basically, put their name to every single section they're responsible for. Yeah,
totally agree with you there, Ian. Good thing too. Quick question from Angela. What's the reason for the ban on the fire engineering assessments? I take it she means in relation to the performance of facades.
Yeah. Well, it said effectively they're banned because you have to, in order to comply. It was really those assessments when it came to the option 3 on the BCA Technical Note 18. So if you've got an existing building, you can have a fire engineering assessment. But if you were to have a new building and you said, well, we can't quite get the U values, so we've got to use K15. If we give you a fire engineer's approach, on a relevant building assessment of this, and they think it's happy, would you accept it? Basically, it's just a no. Whereas before, it was like, okay, well, let's look at it. That was the current thinking. Now it's just can't do it. You've got to comply, and that's it.
No, more resilient standards.
Yeah.
Finally, then I'll conclude an observation from Robert Noble. Robert Noble, who is the Robert who actually spoke to me all those weeks ago and suggested this event. The added processes being proposed for the pre-occupation stage will have a significant effect on the various ways of delivering the design and build procurement. Good, yes, well said, good point. Do you expect these changes to eventually extend to sheltered housing and or other premises used for sleeping?
Yeah, so houses of multiple occupation, HMOs and all that sort of stuff. Well, they're already looking at the regulation changes, they're already looking at extending it to hostels, hotels and HMOs. So, no doubt it's going to move into those areas as well. But the thing is, with a hotel, you have so many kind of life safety. It's much more stringent, with your L1 or your L2 standard smoke detection system, sprinklers, etc. There's far more that lends itself towards those properties, than what an 18-metre building would possibly do. So I don't know. I think it will get extended. That's just my personal opinion, but we'll just have to wait and see. Really, I can see this just being construction right across the board. This whole obviously the residential stuff is it's kind of more important, or is at the forefront. but I think it's going to get extended. You know, there's going to be, you see something great warehouses, you know, Sainsbury's or Amazon down like the M1 or something like that. You know, you wonder what they're wrapped in. You know, and it won't be long till one of those potentially goes up if it is wrapped in something that is not non-combustible. You know, so, but we'll see. Yeah,
there's definitely pressure there, and I don't think it will be resisted. I think, as you say, it will evolve in that way. Fine. Well, I'll conclude. Final observation from me. We heard there about the fire safety order leading to far more scrutiny of the competence of people in our job. And LABC and Hertfordshire Building Control have been proactive in that respect, and a lot of our people are trained under the IFE level 6 examination for competence in dealing with complex buildings for fire safety regulation. So we're well prepared for the new regime when it comes in, and I know LABC Warranty are have the same levels of expertise that we'll be able to take on the changes.
Yeah.
So just remains then for me to once again thank Ian. Really appreciate your time, and you spent a lot of time preparing on that. That was absolutely brought up to date, which is exactly what the audience needed. For everybody's information, if you're interested, there is another CPD event in 2 weeks' time. Myself and my colleague Les Ryder will be covering regulations on preventing fire spread between buildings. So it's sort of an allied topic, but it's a B4 requirement thing. We're going over the basics, but also we're going to do a real deep dive into the more complex aspects of the topic and into the BRE report 187. So it might be a bit of a niche market. I don't expect the huge audience that Ian has attracted today, but anybody who wants to hook into that will be very welcome, and my colleague will be putting out a flyer for you to register for. So that's it for this latest CPD event. I hope it was useful to you. I can't wish you a safe journey home because most of you are home already, but never mind. All I'll say is stay well, all the very best to you, and hope to see you at a future event very soon. Bye for now.